There are seasons in life where silence feels like punishment. You watch others pair off, build homes, post their smiling pictures, while you lie awake wondering, what about me? You've prayed, waited, tried, hoped, and yet the right person never came. But what if your solitude was never rejection? What if it was protection? What if it was preparation? There's a sacred reason behind every delay. Sometimes what looks like isolation is actually a divine initiation. Because the truth is, when you are chosen for something greater, you cannot be paired too soon. You are not being kept single because you are unworthy, but because your soul is being reshaped, refined, and reborn into the version that can hold the weight of destiny. Let's explore 5 truths behind why God, or the divine order, has kept you single all this time. You were being called to meet yourself first because somewhere along the way, you lost sight of who you truly were. The world teaches you to chase connection before consciousness, to find comfort in another's arms before finding peace in your own heart. But divine wisdom doesn't work that way. Before you are given the love you desire, you must be reunited with the person you've become estranged from, yourself. This is why your solitude has stretched longer than you expected. It isn't abandonment, it's an awakening. You are being invited into a sacred space where mirrors are held up, masks fall off, and the truth finally breathes. When you're constantly surrounded by others, it's easy to confuse noise for meaning. You begin to shapeshift, smiling when you're sad, nodding when you disagree, bending so you won't break someone else's illusion. But when the divine removes everyone from your orbit, when the phone grows silent and the bed grows cold, you're forced to confront what's left. You, the unfiltered, unguarded, uncomfortable you, and that encounter can be terrifying. Yet, that's exactly where transformation begins. You begin to see the habits you used to hide behind, the patterns that kept you small, the fears that dictated your choices. You begin to notice how often you gave your power away just to feel chosen. This period of solitude is not a void, it's a mirror. Every moment of loneliness reflects something you've ignored. Every ache of isolation exposes a place where love never reached. It's a slow excavation of your soul, layer by layer, until you begin to recognize your own reflection again.
Many people skip this process.
They rush from relationship to relationship, hoping new faces will heal old wounds. But unhealed pain doesn't disappear. It only disguises itself in new situations. That's why you were called to stop running and start listening, to sit with your silence long enough to hear what your soul has been trying to say. You learn that you were never really lonely. You were just disconnected from your own essence. You mistook noise for connection, attention for affection, and companionship for peace. The divine needed to strip those illusions away so you could finally taste the difference between what soothes you and what saves you. There's a vast difference between filling time and fulfilling purpose. The season of singleness reveals that difference in painful, beautiful ways. Real growth often feels like loss at first. You lose the people who validated your false self. You lose the distractions that kept you numb. You lose the version of you that thought love was something to earn, but in that sacred shedding, something greater emerges. A you that no longer chases approval, a you that no longer negotiates your worth, a you that can finally look in the mirror without flinching. The divine was not keeping you single to deprive you of love, but to teach you how to love without losing yourself. Imagine 2 candles. One burns bright only when the other is lit beside it. The second burns bright no matter what room it's in. The first seeks warmth, the second is warmth. The journey of meeting yourself transforms you from the first candle into the second. You stop seeking light because you realize you are the light. When that realization roots itself in your being, love no longer feels like survival. It feels like celebration. You no longer need someone to see you to feel seen. You already see yourself clearly. Every night you spent questioning your worth was actually preparing you to understand it. Every unanswered prayer was an answer in disguise, an invitation to dig deeper, to discover that your completeness never depended on another's presence. You were being equipped to love with clarity, not confusion. Because when you finally meet someone after you've met yourself, your love becomes purer, freer, stronger. It's no longer a contract born from need. It's a union born from choice. There's a quiet confidence that comes when you meet yourself. You stop begging to be chosen because you realize you already were, by life itself. You stop fearing abandonment because you no longer abandon yourself. You stop chasing validation because you found peace in authenticity. You begin to notice beauty in ordinary moments. Morning sunlight through the curtains, a walk without your phone, laughter that rises from your chest with no audience to perform for. You start building an inner home so stable that no external storm can shake it. And slowly, the loneliness that once haunted you becomes solitude that heals you. You begin to understand why nothing worked out before. You weren't ready to receive love until you could first give it to yourself. The divine wasn't withholding, he was preparing you to walk into a relationship, not as a half looking for another half, but as a whole meeting another whole. The truth is, you were never waiting for someone else to arrive. You were waiting for you, the version of you that knows peace, the version of you that trusts the process, the version of you that no longer mistakes attention for love. When you finally meet that version, the waiting no longer feels heavy, it feels holy, because now you understand that being single wasn't about isolation, it was about integration. It was about remembering that before you could love anyone deeply, you had to meet the one person you had neglected the most, yourself. There are moments in your life when everything begins to fall apart without explanation. People you thought were permanent suddenly drift away, opportunities vanish, and doors that once seemed to open quietly close. It feels unfair, like life is taking from you without reason. But what you often interpret as loss is actually divine protection. You see, when you carry a calling that is larger than your comfort, distractions cannot remain. God begins to remove what cannot go with you. The noise, the unnecessary attachments, the shallow relationships, all of it has to fade so that purpose can finally be heard. Distractions don't always come in obvious forms. Sometimes they come dressed as good intentions, kind faces, and temporary happiness. They make you feel seen, loved, understood, but they quietly pull you off course. You start to live for validation instead of vision. You begin to measure your worth through comparison rather than conviction. Slowly you lose the rhythm of your soul. That's why divine intervention steps in. Even when you resist it, the people who suddenly stopped calling weren't rejecting you. They were being repositioned. The plans that collapsed weren't failures, they were reroutes. You were being guided away from what was comfortable toward what was calling. There is a profound stillness that follows divine removal. When distractions are stripped away, what's left is silence. And in that silence, you finally hear the whisper that's been trying to reach you all along. The whisper that says, you were made for more. Purpose doesn't reveal itself through noise, it reveals itself through emptiness. When the background clamor of other people's opinions fades, the authentic direction of your life starts to come into focus. That's why so many of the most impactful souls in history were first led into isolation. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before his mission began. Elijah hid in a cave before his voice changed nations. Even great thinkers and creators often speak of seasons when everything external went quiet. And in that silence, clarity was born. Maybe you've wondered why God didn't allow a certain relationship to last. It's because some partnerships, no matter how loving they seem, can anchor you in mediocrity. You cannot fulfill a divine purpose while living a life built on distraction. You can't reach your mountain while carrying people who only belong to your valley. That's not cruelty, that's alignment. Sometimes the divine must disappoint your emotions to protect your destiny. You were being refined, separated, and sculpted into someone who could handle the weight of what's ahead. Think of an archer pulling back an arrow. In that backward motion, the arrow might feel like it's moving away from its target, but in truth it's building momentum. Every separation, every delay, every lonely night, it was God pulling you back. Not to punish you, but to propel you. The tension you felt is preparation for release. When the moment comes, everything that once left you will make sense, because it will have cleared your path to purpose. Many people never reach their higher calling because they refuse to let go of the good to receive the great. Distraction is the enemy of destiny. It doesn't have to look evil to be effective. It just has to keep you busy enough to ignore your deeper calling. That's why divine timing often involves subtraction before addition. Before God can give you the life that's meant for you, He must take away the one you've settled for. You cannot hear destiny's voice while holding on to noise. Perhaps there was someone who kept your heart restless, or a job that drained your spirit. At first, losing it hurt, but later, when you looked back, you saw how much of your energy was tied up trying to hold together what was never meant to last. The removal wasn't rejection, it was realignment. You were being redirected from chaos toward clarity. You were being reminded that your worth doesn't depend on what you can keep, but on what you're willing to release. Purpose often hides behind pain. You don't see it while you're crying or questioning, but in hindsight, you realize that the loss made room for something higher. The divine will strip away the shallow to make space for the sacred. It's like pruning a tree. The gardener cuts back branches not to harm it, but so that it can grow stronger, taller, and bear more fruit. In the same way, the people and situations that were cut from your life were making room for new growth. There's also a spiritual law at work here. Anything that distracts you from your essence must eventually dissolve. The universe cannot support false alignments for long. So when something begins to fall apart, instead of resisting, you're being invited to trust. The delay is divine surgery. The emptiness is sacred space. The loss is recalibration. As you walk through this season, you may not understand why certain people were taken out of your path, or why certain prayers seemed unanswered. But one day, you'll look back and realize that everything you thought you needed was only blocking what you were truly meant to receive. God wasn't punishing you by keeping you single, quiet, or alone. He was tuning the instrument of your life so that it could finally play the right song. You were never being left behind. You were being aligned. Every removal was a redirection toward the very thing you were born to do. You were being healed from past wounds you didn't even know existed. There are injuries that live so deep inside you that they no longer feel like pain. They feel like personality. They shape your reactions, your fears, the kind of love you accept, and the kind of peace you believe you deserve. The divine, in its infinite wisdom, knew that if these wounds weren't addressed, they would continue to quietly sabotage your future. So you were placed in a season of solitude, not to punish you, but to heal the unseen fractures that had been dictating your story. Healing, after all, rarely begins in comfort. It begins in confrontation. Many people don't realize that emotional scars often come from long before their last heartbreak. They come from childhood moments of being unseen, unheard, or unappreciated. From parents who loved but couldn't nurture. From environments that rewarded perfection instead of authenticity. Over time, those wounds bury themselves under layers of busyness and distraction. You grow up thinking you've moved on, but what you've really done is built your life around the hurt. Careful not to touch it, careful not to feel it. That's why solitude feels so heavy at first. It strips away the distractions that kept those old wounds covered. And for the first time, you have to face what you've been carrying all along. It's in this quiet space that the divine begins the delicate surgery of your soul. Old memories resurface, unhealed emotions demand attention, and you start to see how much of your life was built as a reaction rather than a choice. You might realize you chose partners who mirrored your earliest heartbreaks, or that you tolerated behaviors that replayed your childhood pain. These revelations are not meant to shame you. They're meant to awaken you, because awareness is the first act of healing. You cannot release what you refuse to acknowledge during this season. You may have wondered why relationships kept failing, or why people kept disappointing you. But each disappointment was medicine, showing you where you still bled. Every betrayal revealed an unhealed belief about your worth. Every rejection pointed to a place where you still thought love had to be earned. These moments were not designed to break you, but to make you conscious. Because healing doesn't happen through comfort, it happens through clarity. You had to see the wound to cleanse it. You had to feel the pain to free it. There's a quiet wisdom in how divine timing works. Healing can't be rushed. It unfolds layer by layer, like peeling back the petals of a rose. Each layer reveals another truth, another memory, another opportunity to forgive. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't forgiving others, it's forgiving yourself for the times you stayed too long, for the times you settled for less, for the times you silenced your own intuition just to keep someone else's love. But forgiveness doesn't mean you approve of what happened. It means you no longer let it own you. It means you reclaim the power you gave away. Think of your soul as a house. Over the years, people came and went, leaving behind their footprints, their clutter, and sometimes their chaos. You kept living there, stepping over the mess because cleaning it felt too painful. Then one day God closed every door, cleared the noise, and said, now it's time to clean. That process feels lonely, feels endless. But as you start picking up the pieces, you realize how much space you've been missing. You realize that the house, the soul, wasn't broken. It was just buried under everything that didn't belong. Healing from invisible wounds also means learning new ways of being. You begin to set boundaries where there once were none. You start saying no without guilt, walking away without explanation, and choosing peace over drama. These small shifts are signs that the healing is working. They're proof that you no longer crave chaos to feel alive. You begin to crave calm, stability, and truth. The old you may have been addicted to emotional highs and lows because that's what felt familiar, but the healed you starts choosing balance over intensity. That's growth, that's freedom. And slowly something miraculous happens. You stop attracting what hurts you and start attracting what honors you. The energy within you changes and life begins to respond differently. Because when you heal the wound, you no longer send out the vibration of pain. You send out peace, self-respect, and wholeness. The kind of people and experiences that match that energy begin to appear. What once felt impossible, trust, intimacy, love, now feels natural because it's no longer filtered through fear. This is why you were kept single for so long. Not because love wasn't available, but because the kind of love that's meant for you requires a healed version of you to receive it. The divine knew that without this inner transformation, even the right person would have been met with your old wounds. And that wouldn't have been fair to either of you. So you were given this sacred season to unlearn survival and rediscover serenity. You were being healed from heartbreaks you didn't talk about, expectations that weren't yours, and emotional patterns that were inherited rather than chosen. Healing doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It shows up quietly in the moments you choose not to react, in the tears you no longer cry over the same story, in the peace that replaces your need to be understood. One day, you'll realize you haven't felt that old ache in a long time. You'll smile at how far you've come and understand that this season of solitude was the greatest act of love the universe could have given you. Because before you could truly love someone else, you first needed to love the parts of yourself that were still waiting to be seen, soothed, and set free. You were being trained to love from strength, not need. The difference between the two is the difference between a cage and a garden. When you love from need, you seek to possess. You hold tightly, fearing loss because deep down you believe that without this person you'll collapse. But when you love from strength, you don't cling. You choose. You no longer approach love as a desperate search for completion, but as a sacred extension of your wholeness. This is why you were kept alone for so long. The divine needed to teach you the language of strength before introducing you to the dialogue of partnership. The world often confuses attachment for love. Movies, songs, and culture romanticize dependence. People who can't live without each other, who lose themselves just to be one. But that isn't love, it's entanglement. True love requires two whole souls standing side by side, not two broken ones leaning against each other to keep from falling. If you had met someone too soon, before you had learned your own worth, you would have built your relationship on survival instead of stability. You would have loved to feel needed rather than to share meaning. That's why God had to separate you, so you could find the strength to stand alone. In solitude, you were being tested. You were learning how to comfort yourself when no one texted back, how to find peace without someone's approval, how to feel valuable without an audience. Those long nights when loneliness felt unbearable were actually training grounds for inner independence. You were learning how to generate your own warmth instead of waiting for someone else to ignite it. Each moment you resisted the urge to settle for less, You were strengthening your emotional foundation. Every time you chose growth over comfort, you were rewiring your soul for authentic love. Think of love as a home. If the foundation is weak, the entire structure collapses under pressure. Most relationships fail because both people built on need, each expecting the other to fill the emptiness they never faced. But love built on strength is different. It stands firm because both partners bring their own fullness. They don't seek to be completed, they come together to expand. You were being trained to build that kind of foundation. The divine was teaching you not to see partnership as an escape from solitude, but as a continuation of self-mastery. During this period, you learned the power of emotional self-sufficiency. You discovered that your happiness is not someone else's responsibility, and your peace cannot depend on another person's consistency.
That lesson is what transforms ordinary love into divine love. When you no longer need someone to feel whole, you become capable of loving freely, without control, fear, or attachment.
You can appreciate someone's presence without fearing their absence.
That's not coldness. That's maturity. That's the kind of love that doesn't imprison, it liberates.
You also began to notice how the world changes when you operate from strength. You stop chasing people who aren't choosing you. You stop begging to be seen because you already know your own value. The relationships that once drained you start to feel unnecessary, and peace becomes your new standard. You start to understand that love isn't about finding someone who never leaves. It's about finding someone who matches your peace. You no longer crave intensity, you crave consistency. You no longer want to be rescued, you want to be respected. This is what it means to love from strength. Every heartbreak before this was a teacher. Each one showed you the difference between dependency and devotion. You learned that love isn't supposed to hurt more than it heals, that it's not supposed to feel like losing yourself. The divine used every disappointment to refine your understanding, to train you to love in a way that adds rather than empties. You began to see that real love doesn't demand you shrink to fit it. It meets you where you are and grows with you. But to recognize that kind of love, you first had to experience what it wasn't. You had to walk through weakness to appreciate strength. Think of a seed buried in the soil. In darkness, it grows roots that no one sees. That hidden growth is what allows it to stand tall when it finally breaks through the surface. Your solitude was the soil, your healing the roots. You were being strengthened in unseen ways, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, so that when love finally arrives, it won't knock you off balance. You'll be able to love deeply without losing your center. And there's a quiet beauty in realizing that you can stand on your own. That realization changes everything. You stop fearing loss because you understand you can survive it. You stop overgiving because you've learned the value of your energy. You stop begging for attention because you've discovered how to give it to yourself. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you grounded. You become the kind of person who doesn't need love, but attracts it effortlessly because you radiate security, not scarcity. The divine had to let you walk alone so that when you finally walk with someone, you'll walk as an equal, not as a dependent. You are being trained to love in a way that doesn't drain you, but empowers both of you. Love from need says, I can't live without you. Love from strength says, I choose to live with you. One imprisons, the other liberates. You were being prepared to love in that liberated way. To give from overflow, not emptiness, and to receive without losing yourself. Because the love that's meant for you won't complete you. It will complement the strength you've already become. The person destined for you is also being prepared. Just because you can't see the process doesn't mean it's not happening. Somewhere, someone is walking through their own wilderness, learning their own lessons, shedding their own illusions. They're being refined by the same hands that have been shaping you. You both are being molded, separately, so that when you finally meet, you will recognize each other not by looks or charm, but by energy. You will feel it in your spirit, that this is the person whose journey has been aligned with yours long before you even knew their name. In moments of loneliness, it's easy to believe that you've been forgotten. You scroll through the highlight reels of other people's lives and think, why not me? Why not now? But what you don't realize is that your waiting isn't wasted. It's synchronized. There is a divine choreography at play. The same way a sunrise doesn't rush and a seed doesn't bloom before its season, your love story has a timing that cannot be forced. The person meant for you isn't late. They're simply being made ready to meet you in wholeness, not in pieces. Imagine two travelers on separate roads. They can't see each other, but each step they take is leading them closer to a destined intersection. Along the way, both stumble, fall, and learn. One learns patience, the other learns compassion. One learns how to listen, the other learns how to speak with kindness. These lessons may seem unrelated, but they are essential for what's to come when their paths finally cross. Their individual journeys will make sense. Every heartbreak, every detour, every almost will reveal its purpose. It was never rejection, it was preparation. The person meant for you might right now be unlearning habits that would have hurt you. They might be healing from heartbreaks they needed to experience, so they could appreciate your love when it arrives. Perhaps they're discovering their passions, pursuing their calling, or building the foundation that will one day support the life you'll share together. The timing isn't off, it's divine alignment. The same hand that's been guiding your growth is guiding theirs, weaving two separate lives into one eventual harmony. This process requires trust. Trust that you don't have to chase what's meant for you. Trust that the divine knows how to bring two souls together at the right moment in the right way. Think about all the times you thought you found the one, only for it to crumble. Those were rehearsals, not failures. Each one taught you something crucial, what you need, what you can't compromise on, what kind of love truly feels like home. The same is happening for them. They are learning what kind of person they must become to hold the kind of heart you carry. Perhaps they're learning discipline, building emotional maturity, or learning to let go of ego. Maybe they're realizing the difference between infatuation and genuine connection. They're being stretched, humbled, and purified by life, just as you have been. Because when two healed souls meet, they don't collide. They align. Their love doesn't come to fix, it comes to fulfill. But for that to happen, both must first be whole. Think of it like a symphony. Each instrument must be tuned separately before the music begins. If one is out of tune, the entire performance suffers. Your solitude has been your tuning season. You've been adjusting your heart, your values, your vision, and somewhere your future partner is being tuned too. Their rhythm is being aligned to yours, their purpose being sharpened so it will complement, not compete with, your own. When the moment comes, your hearts will recognize each other not through effort, but through resonance. There's a sacred patience required in this process. It's easy to grow restless, to question why it's taking so long. But what you call delay, heaven calls design. The divine doesn't want to give you a love that's rushed. It wants to give you a love that's ready if you met them too early. You might have mistaken them for just another chapter. Meeting them later ensures they become the book you never want to end. Timing isn't a barrier. It's a blessing that ensures the foundation will hold. And when you finally cross paths, you'll both feel it. The peace, the familiarity, the sense that somehow you've been walking toward this moment your whole life. Conversations will feel effortless, silence is comfortable, and love will no longer feel like striving. It will feel like arriving. You'll see in their eyes the reflection of all you've endured, all you've healed, and all you've become. You'll realize that every unanswered prayer was answered in this one meeting. Every heartbreak was guiding you here. So don't lose heart if the waiting feels long. Somewhere, someone is praying for you without knowing your name. They are walking through lessons designed to prepare them for your love. They are being taught how to hold your heart with reverence, how to cherish peace over passion, and how to build a life that honors both your dreams. While you've been preparing for them, they've been preparing for you. When divine timing finally opens the door, you'll both step through it as the healed, awakened souls you were always meant to be. Proof that what's destined never arrives early, never arrives late, but always, unfailingly right on time. And now, as this journey comes full circle, take a moment to breathe and recognize just how far you've come. What once felt like endings were really beginnings in disguise. Every delay, every heartbreak, every season of loneliness was not punishment. It was positioning. You were not being abandoned. You were being aligned. The pain that once felt unbearable became the very soil where your strength took root. The silence that once echoed like emptiness became the sacred space where you met yourself, where you met God. You see now that none of it was random. The detours led you exactly where you needed to be. The lessons you learned alone have prepared you to love differently, to live differently, to love from strength, not from need. And as you've been molded, so has the one destined for you. Two souls shaped by divine timing, refined through patience, and awakened through purpose. When your paths finally meet, you'll understand why it had to happen this way. You'll see that every unanswered prayer was a redirection toward something greater, something lasting, something true. So hold your head high, not in pride, but in peace. The waiting wasn't a waste. It was your awakening. You've been called to rise, to trust, to prepare for the love and the life that are already on their way to meet you. What's meant for you is not behind you. It's ahead, waiting in perfect alignment with your healing, your purpose, and your readiness. Trust the process. Keep walking your path with faith and openness, because the moment you stopped chasing what wasn't meant for you, destiny started running toward you. And when it finally arrives, you'll smile, not because it was easy, but because it was worth every step it took to get there.